So, um, what if the 100% you got on your Friday spelling test in school meant, like, absolutely nothing?
Right, which is a pretty jarring thought for most of us.
Yeah, exactly. Or worse, what if the entire system of grades and, all the metrics we use to measure intelligence is actually just measuring our temporary ability to hold our breath underwater?
I love that analogy because
Okay.
we do crave that visible metric, don't we?
Oh, totally. I mean, if you really think about it, when we want to measure something in the physical world, we trust our tools implicitly. Like you want to know the length of a room, you pull out a tape measure. It's a solid fact.
Right? It's undeniable. But when we try to figure out if knowledge has actually taken root in the human brain, well, our traditional measuring sticks might be completely unreliable.
Which is exactly what we're unpacking today. For you listening, we're doing a deep dive into this incredibly fascinating set of instructional frameworks and notes.
And the context of these sources is really what makes them so compelling. They were originally designed for parents who are homeschooling their kids.
Yes. And by stripping away the industrial architecture of a traditional classroom like the standardized tests, the rigid pacing, the crowd control-less framework forces us to look at the raw biological mechanics of how a human being actually acquires knowledge.
Yeah, because when you remove that institutional scaffolding, you can't just hide behind a letter grade.
No, you really can't.
You have to face the actual mechanics of learning. So the overarching theme of the materials we're looking at today is that our traditional models of learning, they focus really heavily on compliance
Right.
and short-term performance, rather than genuine mastery.
So our mission for this deep dive is to decode this blueprint. We're going to examine why we need to ditch concepts like memorization and busy work and look at how to guarantee that true learning actually sticks.
Because the truth is, whether you are trying to teach a 9-year-old math or you are trying to upskill in your own complex career, the mechanics of the brain remain exactly the same.
Exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this. We have to start by dismantling what the notes call the illusion of learning.
Right, which is this false belief we all hold that a good grade equals permanent comprehension.
Yeah, because consider the mechanics of short-term memorization. If you score 100% on a spelling test on a Friday, the system records that as mastery.
But if you take that exact same test 2 weeks later with no review and score at 20%, what did that original grade actually measure?
It just measured your capacity to temporarily juggle information.
Precisely.
It's kind of like cramming all your belongings into a closet and leaning against the door so it doesn't burst open while a guest walks by. You haven't organized the room, you've just temporarily hidden the mess.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. Neurologically speaking, you are just holding information in your working memory, or at best, very fragile short-term memory.
Right.
So that grade just told you what you could perform in a highly specific 5-minute window. It offered zero predictive value regarding what neural pathways would remain intact by the following Monday.
Wow. So to replace that broken grading system, this framework introduces something called the 4 levels of skill. And it completely redefines what progress looks like.
It really does.
The levels are discover, learn, execute, and teach. But the way these words are used in the source material is very specific, isn't it?
Very specific. So level 1, discover, is merely exposure. You've heard a term or seen a concept.
Okay, makes sense.
Then level 2 is learn, and this is actually the trap level.
Wait, why is it a trap?
Because in this framework, learn means you can get the right answer, but only with assistance. Like you can solve the equation, but only if you have your notes open or if the teacher is guiding you step by step.
Oh, wow. Which seems to be exactly where most traditional training stops. You complete the worksheet with the formula sitting right in front of you,
Yeah.
You get the answers right, you receive a check mark, and you move on.
Exactly. But that's assisted performance. It's a total illusion of independence. It relies entirely on external scaffolding.
So how do you break free of that?
To achieve actual cognitive independence, you have to push to level 3, which is execute. This means you can perform the skill consistently with no prompting, no notes, and crucially, you can apply it to novel problems.
Your brain has internalized the pattern.
Right, but even level 3 isn't the ultimate goal. The pinnacle of this architecture is level 4, which is teach.
Yeah, and there's a brilliant story in these notes that perfectly illustrates level 4. It's about 2 brothers, Tyler and Jackson.
Oh yeah, the multiplication story.
Right. So Jackson is 9 years old, and he's completely stuck on a basic multiplication problem, 5 times 5. And Tyler, the older brother, he doesn't just hand him the answer of 25.
Because that would just be giving him the answer to memorize.
Exactly. Instead, Tyler grabs a whiteboard and physically draws out 5 distinct groups of 5 dots. He maps out what the abstract concept of times actually means in the real world.
Which requires a very deep understanding.
Yeah. Watching Tyler do that, no multiple choice test was needed to prove Tyler understood multiplication. His ability to restructure his own knowledge and transmit it to a novice was the absolute proof of level 4 mastery.
Because the ability to teach requires you to deconstruct a concept, anticipate the gaps in another person's understanding, and dynamically rebuild the concept in real time.
Which you just can't do if you've merely memorized a fact. Going back to my earlier thought, memorizing is like holding your breath underwater. Teaching the material is like actually learning how to breathe underwater.
I really like that. And what's deeply shifting about this framework is how it redefines failure through something called the redemption principle.
Right, because in a traditional system, a wrong answer is penalized with an F in a grade book. It's like a permanent stain.
But in a system built on these 4 levels of mastery, an F does not exist. There's only not yet.
You simply haven't reached level 3 or 4 yet. The mistake isn't some huge character flaw. It's just a GPS coordinate telling you where you are on the map.
Exactly. It removes the punitive anxiety from the learning process. But, acknowledging that teaching is the ultimate goal naturally leads us to a practical problem.
Which is how we actually get there.
Right. How do we systematically move someone from level 1 to level 4? Because handing someone a textbook and hoping for the best clearly doesn't work.
And that brings us to a really sharp distinction the framework makes between a topic and a skill. This fundamentally changes how you design a task.
It does.
So reading is a topic, but reading fluency is a skill. Math is a topic. Multiplying 2-digit numbers is a skill.
And this distinction is crucial because it exposes the massive inefficiency of what we call busy work. When tasks are designed around topics rather than specific skills, you end up with low-level cognitive tasks disguised as educational rigor.
Right, like copying a list of vocabulary words 10 times each, or grinding through a worksheet with 100 identical math problems.
Yeah, it feels productive and it keeps everyone quiet.
But the cognitive load is almost zero once that initial pattern is recognized.
Exactly, because copying a word 10 times only builds the physical motor skill of copying. It does absolutely nothing to build the cognitive skill of actually utilizing that vocabulary word in a complex sentence.
So to fix this, the framework offers a 60-second, 3-step formula to convert any piece of busy work into genuine skill work.
Right, let's go through those.
Step 1 is to name the specific skill you are targeting. Step 2 is to push past level 2 by taking the book away. Remove the safety net. And step 3 is to add retrieval.
So let's break down the mechanics of why that works, using your example of the 100 mindless math problem.
Yeah, please do.
The conversion formula says instead of 100 problems, do just 10, but vary the difficulty across 3 different levels. And here is the crucial step: the learner must explain the hardest problem out loud.
Oh, so they have to actually articulate why the underlying formula works.
Right. Or, if they're reading a chapter, instead of letting them answer 5 open book questions at the end, force them to close the book entirely and teach back the core thesis of the chapter.
Okay, I do want to push back on this just a little bit, though. When we look at high performance in other domains, repetition is the gold standard.
Sure.
Like a basketball player will shoot 1,000 free throws. A pianist will play the same arpeggio 1,000 times. If practice makes perfect in those arenas, why is grinding out 100 math problems considered so bad here?
That is a very common point of friction, but it requires us to separate motor cortex execution from prefrontal cortex problem solving.
Okay, go on.
When a basketball player shoots 1,000 free throws, they are refining a physical neuromuscular pathway. But cognitive learning is different. When you do 100 identical math problems, by problem number 11, your brain has recognized the pattern.
And it just shifts into autopilot.
Exactly, to conserve energy. You are no longer thinking, you are simply executing a closed loop.
So you're basically building speed, but not depth.
Precisely. Active cognitive retrieval, forcing the brain to pull information from memory without a textbook in front of you, and then having to verbally articulate the why, that forces the creation of much deeper, more complex neural networks.
That makes total sense.
It's the difference between walking down a paved road versus having to hack your own path through a dense forest. Hacking the path is slower and harder, but you will intimately know the terrain afterward.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Let's say a learner successfully hacks that path. They hit level 4 today, they close the book, they do the active retrieval, they teach the concept back perfectly.
Right.
Why is it that 38 hours later, they can look at that exact same material and draw a complete blank? That implies reaching level 4 isn't a permanent state, which is incredibly frustrating.
It is frustrating, but only if we misunderstand the biology of memory. We are completely conditioned to view forgetting as a failure, a glitch in our cognitive software or a sign of poor intelligence.
Right, like we did something wrong.
But the neuroscience shows that forgetting is actually a highly efficient biological feature.
Yeah, and this goes back to the foundational research of Hermann Ebbinghaus and the modern replications of his work, like
Yeah.
that 2015 study by Murren Droz.
Yes, the forgetting curve.
They mapped out this forgetting curve, and the data is just staggering.
Right.
Roughly half of what a human being learns fades within the first 24 hours. Half of it. Just gone.
And we have to ask why the brain does this. Maintaining neural connections requires metabolic energy. The brain is an energy-intensive organ, and it is ruthlessly efficient.
So it's basically clearing the cache.
Essentially, if it doesn't receive a signal that a piece of information is critical for survival or frequent use, it begins pruning those synaptic connections to save energy. Forgetting is a feature of metabolic efficiency.
Which means the absolute worst thing you can do when someone forgets a concept is to get frustrated and aggressively reteach the entire lesson from scratch. It's like punishing the brain for doing its job.
Exactly. Reteaching from scratch wastes time and it spikes frustration. The scientifically proven remedy for the forgetting curve is a technique called spaced retrieval.
Okay, how does that work in practice?
You introduce the concept, you allow the forgetting curve to do its natural pruning for a few days, and then you ask a low-stakes question to force a recall.
Like sitting at the breakfast table and casually asking, hey, what was 7 times 8 again?
Exactly. No flashcards, no timer.
Just a sudden demand on the brain to retrieve the data. It makes me think of building muscle. You don't actually build muscle while you're at the gym lifting heavy weights.
Right, you're just creating micro tears in the tissue.
Exactly. The muscle is built during the recovery days while you're resting.
Hmm.
In this context, the brain needs time to slightly degrade the memory so that the retrieval muscle has to strain to pull it back to the surface.
That is an excellent analogy.
Because if you review it immediately, there's no strain and therefore no growth.
The harder the brain has to work to retrieve the memory, the stronger that subsequent neural connection becomes. It signals to the brain, hey, this information is being demanded again. Do not prune this pathway.
But implementing spaced retrieval casually at breakfast brings up a massive structural problem. If we abandon formal quizzes and written tests, how do we actually track progress?
That's a fair question.
How do you know if you are moving someone through the 4 levels if you aren't grading them?
Well, the materials outlined 3 assessment methods that rely entirely on observation and dialogue rather than written tests.
Okay.
The first is the teach-back method, which directly assesses level 4. You simply ask a learner to explain the concept to you as if you were a complete novice.
And the second is the week later check, which tests level 3 retention. So 7 days after the initial learning, you casually ask them to execute the skill without any warm-up or review.
Right. And the third is the new situation test, where you observe if they can map the concept onto a totally unexpected real-life scenario.
But these test-free assessments come with a critical caveat. To make them work, the environment must be what the framework calls a judgment-free zone.
Yes, and if you violate the rules of this zone, the entire assessment collapses.
Reading about this actually highlighted a major flaw in my own communication.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Here is my dilemma.
Right.
If I ask someone to teach a concept back to me, whether it's a colleague explaining a project or a kid explaining math, and they say something that is fundamentally factually incorrect, my immediate burning instinct is to jump in.
To fix it right away?
Yes. I want to interrupt and say, wait, no, actually it's this. If my goal is to help them learn, why shouldn't I correct the error in real time?
Because the moment you interrupt to correct them, you trigger a physiological shift. You transform a safe cognitive exercise into a high-stakes evaluation.
Ah.
The amygdala activates, cortisol levels spike slightly, and their brain shifts from a state of open problem-solving to a state of social preservation. They realize they are being judged.
So they stop trying to logically work through the problem, and they just start throwing out guesses to make the uncomfortable correction stop.
Precisely. They will tell you whatever they think you want to hear. So to prevent this, The framework provides a simple rule. Say this, not that.
Okay.
Instead of interrupting with close, but actually it's this, you bite your tongue, you let them finish, and you respond with curiosity. You say, interesting, what made you think that? Or walk me through your logic on that last step.
So you're treating their mistake as raw, neutral data rather than a failure that requires immediate policing.
And the beautiful thing about asking them to explain their logic is that very often the act of verbalizing it causes them to catch their own error. Self-correction is an infinitely more powerful learning event than being corrected by an authority figure.
Okay, but what happens when things still go wrong? Let's say you've done everything perfectly. You converted the busy work to skill work. You spaced out the retrieval. You created a pristine, judgment-free zone. And the learner is still staring at you with a completely blank expression.
Yeah, that's tough.
The emotional weight of hitting that wall is incredibly heavy. The immediate assumption is usually either they just aren't smart enough to grasp this, or I'm a terrible teacher.
It is a heavy feeling, but the research provides a deeply liberating alternative perspective. When a learner hits a hard wall like that, the barrier is almost never their innate intelligence, nor is it your baseline capability as a teacher.
And what is it?
The problem is usually the delivery channel.
Which naturally leads into the debate about learning styles. We hear this constantly, right? I can't learn this way, I'm a visual learner, or she's an auditory learner.
Right, it's everywhere.
But the notes cite some very specific research, particularly the 2008 study by Pashler and his colleagues, that completely dismantles this idea. The concept that a human brain is hardwired to learn exclusively through one dominant style is a myth.
It is a remarkably persistent myth, mostly due to confirmation bias. People prefer certain inputs, sure, but that doesn't mean their brain can only process information that way.
Right.
The actual cognitive science relies on concepts like dual coding theory. This theory explains that our working memory has separate, parallel processing channels for visual and verbal information.
Meaning you aren't overloading the brain by using both. You're actually maximizing its capacity.
Exactly. The solution isn't to find the one magical learning style for a specific person. The scientifically backed approach is multimodal delivery. It's about broadcasting the information across multiple channels simultaneously.
The examples given in the framework make this so clear. If you are teaching fractions, you don't just stand there and verbally explain numerators and denominators. That's a single auditory channel. It's too thin.
Way too thin.
Instead, you physically cut a real pizza, engaging the visual and hands-on channels while simultaneously asking verbal questions. Or if you're teaching history, you don't just read aloud from a textbook. You watch a short video clip, you physically act out the scene in the living room, and then you write a single sentence summarizing the event.
By activating the visual, auditory, and kinesthetic pathways at the exact same time, you provide the brain with multiple, distinct hooks to grab onto the concept. If the auditory pathway doesn't connect with their current cognitive state, well, the visual or kinesthetic pathway will.
It's less like trying to tune into a specific radio station and more like weaving a rope.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. If you only explain a concept verbally, you are handing the learner a single thread. It can snap under the slightest pressure. But if you add a visual element and a physical action, you are braiding 3 threads together. The memory becomes a thick, durable rope that won't easily break.
That's a great visual.
The problem was never the learner's brain. The problem was that a single thread just wasn't strong enough to hold the weight of the concept.
That is a perfect encapsulation of why multimodal delivery works. And when you utilize that braided approach, you naturally accelerate the learner's journey through the 4 levels of skill.
It really is a complete paradigm shift for anyone who has ever had to learn or teach anything. So what does this all mean? We've covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by breaking the illusion of grades and recognizing that temporary memorization is just holding our breath. We walked through the 4 levels of skill, culminating in the ultimate test, the ability to teach. We explored how to convert mindless busy work into cognitively active skill work in 60 seconds.
We also look deeply into the biology of the forgetting curve, understanding that forgetting is a metabolic feature, not a bug, and why spaced retrieval is the necessary fix.
Right.
We examined how to assess understanding without triggering a cortisol response in the judgment-free zone, and finally, how to bypass the frustration of a blank stare by weaving a multimodal rope.
It changes how you view every interaction where information is exchanged.
It does. And to leave you with one final thought to mull over, we spent this time discussing how these frameworks apply to human brains. But consider the rapidly advancing landscape of artificial intelligence.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right now, AI can instantly execute almost any level 2 or level 3 task you give it. It can solve the complex equation with the manual open. It can execute the code independently.
It can do the execution perfectly.
Yes, which means, as we look toward the future, the ability to simply execute a skill will no longer be a competitive advantage.
Because the machines already have that covered.
Exactly. If AI owns level 2 and level 3, then the only truly future-proof, irreplaceable human skill left is level 4. The ability to deeply synthesize complex information, understand the nuanced gaps in another person's mind, and physically sit down and teach it to another human being.
That is a really profound realization. It forces us to ask, are we building the skills that actually matter? Or are we just admiring our footprints in the sand right before the tide rolls in? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us today. Until next time, keep questioning how you learn.